He signed the divorce papers with a smug smile still lingering on his face. His gesture felt like the final victory of a man who believed he had everything under control. At that moment, Elena Moore, sat across from him in the courtroom, my hands cold, but my eyes fixed on the sealed envelope that the judge was slowly opening. It was my father's final will. A quiet man who never once lost faith in his daughter. Raymond. My husband stared at me without blinking, as if he were waiting for the final act of a play that he himself had directed. He thought he had calculated every move. That I, a plain wife from a working-class background with nothing but a vulnerable heart and a job as a teacher few respected, would walk away from this marriage with nothing. But the moment the judge began reading the first lines of the will, I could see it clearly, the pride on Raymond's face shattered like glass beneath his feet. The room was wrapped in silence, broken only by the sound of rustling paper, and something irreversible had begun to unfold. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this story from? Leave a comment below, because somewhere out there, someone who's been underestimated is still waiting for their moment, just as I once was. And don't forget to follow the channel. My story and the lesson behind it has only just begun. 3 years ago, I wasn't the composed Elena sitting in court today. I was a high school literature teacher devoted to my job, living simply and still recovering from the loss of my father. Each month I stretched every penny, but I believed that if I lived with kindness, things would eventually be okay. I met Raymond at a charity gala. He arrived in a tailored suit with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. A successful financial consultant, wealthy, confident, and the kind of man who made people feel safe. I remember the first time he took me to dinner, not the fanciest restaurant, but he noticed the smallest things. It made me think, maybe this is someone who sees real worth. Just 6 months into dating, he proposed with a diamond ring. I was certain cost more than my annual salary. And I said yes. I truly believed I was the lucky girl stepping into a fairy tale. But not all fairy tales end with a happy ending. What I didn't realize was that behind all the romance was a setup calculated, silent, and cruel. Raymond wasn't looking for a life partner. He was looking for someone easy to control, easy to convince, and willing to sign anything in the name of love. And sadly, I had once been that person. At first it was sweet. Raymond bought me my first car, took me on trips, and constantly reassured me, "You don't need to worry about anything. I'll take care of us both." I thought that was love, but it was power. Little comments started to slip in, subtle, yet enough to make me pause. "Teaching is cute, but you deserve a bigger life." Or, "Your stories about your students are sweet, but they sound like children's chatter." When I shared my dream of becoming a principal, he laughed, patted my head, and said, "Why stress yourself? Let me handle everything. Just enjoy life." I smiled along, but inside I felt small. It wasn't love anymore. It was a gilded cage. Raymond began hosting dinner parties with his colleagues from the finance world. When someone asked what I did, he'd chime in before I could answer. "Oh, Elena's just a teacher. Keeps herself busy with the kids while I handle the serious stuff. Just a teacher." Those 3 words coming from the man I married sliced my self-worth a little deeper each time. I started shrinking inside my own home. Whenever I tried to join conversations, he'd interrupt with a smirk, "Sweetheart, let the grown-ups talk." And the quiet chuckles of suited men around the table told me I was being pushed out of my own life bit by bit. In our 2nd year of marriage, Raymond changed silently and chillingly, like winter arriving unannounced. He left early, came home late, blaming urgent deals, big clients, or last-minute meetings. His phone was always on him, buzzing constantly. Each time he'd slip into another room to take the call, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked about his work, he gave vague answers, then changed the subject. Dinner together became rare. The gourmet meals turned into microwave trays, eaten in silence. And his eyes, the eyes that once looked at me like I was his whole world, now seemed to gaze through me, distant and cold. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I kept telling myself, he's tired. It's work stress. I gave him every excuse just to silence the ache building in my heart. Instead of confronting it, I buried myself in teaching. I stayed late, tutored after class, led student clubs and competitions. At school, I was respected. My students listened, trusted, and thanked me. They reminded me that I still mattered, even if at home I was just the woman who doesn't understand finance. One day, a student named Maya broke down crying about her family. I stayed late to help her rebuild her academic plan called her mother. And after months of effort, Maya didn't just pass, she won a full scholarship to a top university. She hugged me and said, "Miss Elena, I don't know where I'd be without you." And in that moment, I remembered who I truly was, someone brave, compassionate, and who never abandoned anyone. Too bad the man I loved had already abandoned me. It was a Tuesday night so ordinary it was almost eerie. I had just returned from a parent-teacher conference carrying a quiet joy from helping a family map out their son's future. I walked down the hallway ready to share it with Raymond, even though I knew he no longer cared. His office door was ajar. I heard a low chuckle and his voice smooth and careless on the phone. "Trust me, David. She has no clue." It's almost cute how naive she is. I froze. My heart skipped. She thinks I married her for love. Truth is, I married her for the land her father left. She signed every paper I handed her. The house, the savings, her dad's assets, all under my control now. A cold laugh followed. I felt the blood drain from my face. I should win an award for this performance. 3 years pretending to love a boring little school teacher, best investment I ever made. My throat tightened. I backed away, knees weak. It wasn't that I had lost love. The truth was, love never existed. That night, I lay beside the man who once made me feel like royalty. He slept soundly while my world shattered in silence. But from that wreckage, something unexpected was born: clarity. And I knew that if I could rise from this betrayal, I wouldn't just take back what was stolen. I'd take back myself. I didn't cry that night. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. Instead, I quietly packed a bag, told him I was staying at my mother's for a few days, and left. But I didn't go to my mother's. I went to a woman named Margaret Wells, the lawyer who once helped my father settle his estate. A quiet woman with salt and pepper hair, thin glasses, and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing too much for too long. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she tapped her fingers against her coffee mug and said, "He's good, but not good enough. And your father may have left him a surprise." The next 2 weeks were a blur of documents, meetings, notarized papers, and legal lingo I had to Google at night. But somewhere in that chaos, I started to feel something I hadn't in months control. Margaret dug up a clause in my father's will one I hadn't noticed when I first signed the inheritance documents. It stated clearly, the land in question is to be held in a private trust, not to be merged with marital assets unless agreed upon in writing. I never signed anything like that. And that changed everything. What Raymond thought he owned wasn't legally his, and what I thought I had lost might still be mine. But Margaret wasn't done. "There's more," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Your father didn't just leave you the land. He left you something far more valuable, but it's hidden. I need time to trace the paperwork." I looked down at the folder, then back at her. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. The game had shifted. Now it was my turn to play. 2 weeks later, Margaret called me. Her voice was calm, but something in her tone felt different. "Elena, I think you should sit down." I obeyed, partly out of fear, partly out of hope. "I just received the official assessment report from the land registry. Your father's plot of land, it's not empty like everyone thought. Underneath it lies a natural gas pocket. Current estimated value around $12 million. I went completely still. That number unimaginable to someone like me. To anyone who had ever thought of me as the poor schoolteacher. And that's not all, Margaret continued. "I also found a financial trust set up years ago by your father. It's designed to activate when you turn 30, or in the case of a divorce." I gripped the phone tightly, stunned, not just from the money, more than $2 million quietly resting for years, but because for the first time in years, I felt protected. My father, the quiet man who never spoke of grand things, had quietly built a safety net beneath my entire life. Not because he thought I was weak, but because he knew that if I ever got hurt, I'd need a second chance to rise again. Inside the file was a handwritten letter in that familiar penmanship I hadn't seen in so long. To my daughter, "If you're reading this, it means you need an anchor. Know that even if I'm not here, you are never truly alone. I believe in you, and I want you to define your worth, not let anyone else decide it." I clutched that letter to my chest, tears falling freely. Not out of sadness, but because I realized, even though the one who loved me most was gone, his love never left. On the last Thursday of October, the final family court hearing began. The courtroom air was tense and cold like a violin string pulled taut. Raymond sat across from me wearing a sharp gray suit, his expression relaxed as if he were heading into a routine business deal. He had no idea. The chessboard had already turned. Next to me was Margaret, calm, collected, with a thick file resting on the table. Throughout the earlier hearings, we hadn't mentioned the land or the trust. Margaret had said, "Let them think they're winning." A counterattack only stings when it's unexpected. The judge called the case. Raymond's lawyer stood up first, voice smooth as silk. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Raymond Blake, requests a fair divorce settlement. The couple's assets were primarily acquired through his contributions. The small parcel of land inherited by Mrs. Elena was used as collateral for their home. Therefore, we propose selling it to repay debts and splitting the remaining value evenly." Raymond nodded, with each sentence glancing at me with that same patronizing look. Then Margaret stood. "Your Honor," she said with a voice as calm as if reading tomorrow's weather, "we have additional information that must be considered prior to ruling." I looked at Raymond. He still looked smug. Until Margaret opened the folder. "First," she began, "the plot inherited by my client is not worthless. According to the latest geological survey, the land sits atop a natural gas pocket worth approximately $12 million. Raymond's lawyer dropped his pen. Raymond's face drained of color, but that was only the first blow. Second, Margaret continued. My client's father, Mr. Gerald Moore, established a personal trust completely separate from marital assets. That account now holds over $2 million solely belonging to Mrs. Elena. The judge raised an eyebrow. Raymond turned frantically to his attorney. But Margaret wasn't finished. Finally, we have an audio recording in which Mr. Blake discusses a plan to defraud his wife of her inheritance through this divorce. I watched Raymond crumble just as I once had standing in front of his office door. This time it was his turn to face the truth. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Evelyn Hartley, known for being firm and fair, placed the file down looking straight at Raymond Mr. Blake based on the evidence presented. There is clear intent of manipulation and deceit regarding your wife's inheritance. Raymond tried to stand and protest, but the judge raised her hand. Silence. I said nothing. I didn't have to. The truth was speaking for me. Mrs. Moore, the judge, turned to me, her eyes softened. The trust and the land left by your father are separate personal assets. They will remain wholly yours. Raymond blinked rapidly, face pale as chalk. Due to the defendant's fraudulent behavior, the prenuptial agreement is hereby voided. Mrs. Elena Moore will receive half of all joint assets, including the house investments and savings. Raymond's face twisted with disbelief. He looked to his lawyer, but no one could save him from his own words. Furthermore, the judge concluded, Mr. Blake will cover all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Moore. This hearing is adjourned. The sound of the gavel struck like a final blow, but to me it was the unlocking of a long-awaited door. I walked out of that courtroom, not in triumph, but in peace. Raymond chased after me into the parking lot. Desperation in his voice. Elena, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. I turned to face the man who once made me believe in fairy tales. No, Raymond. It's exactly what I think. The only difference is, I'm not that girl who believed you anymore. And I walked away, my heels crunching against the gravel, but my heart felt weightless. I left that parking lot without looking back. Not because I was running, but because there was nothing left to grieve. I had spent 3 years trying to be a worthy wife in the eyes of a man who never saw my worth to begin with. I used to think that if I were gentler, quieter, more accommodating, he would love me again. Now I understand true love has no conditions. And if you must sacrifice your dignity to keep someone, it's not love. It's control wrapped in pretty words. I returned to my small rented apartment. No gourmet kitchen, no designer wardrobes, no man reminding me I should be grateful to be chosen. But I had morning sunlight through soft curtains. I had emails from students thanking me for the impact I made. I had the quiet voice of my father, always calm, always believing in me. And I had myself. The letter from my father is now framed on my desk. Each morning I read a small piece of it. Not to cry, but to remember that I am loved. I am prepared, and I am strong enough to walk away. Raymond once said I was just a plain, boring teacher. For a while I believed him, but now I know I was never ordinary. I was just misjudged by someone unworthy. And if you're listening to my story, I hope you remember this. Never let anyone define your worth. You don't owe the world an explanation. You just need to believe you are already enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been underestimated or hurt by the wrong person, I hope my journey reminds you, you can rise. And when you do, you will shine brighter than ever. Leave a comment below if this touched you. And don't forget to follow the channel. We've got many more stories of healing and empowerment to share.